Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My dear students of Ajman University, today we will talk about suspensions. Suspensions. This is a new topic and it's classified under dispersed systems. Okay, and in dispersed systems, we are going to talk mainly about suspensions and emulsions. In this video presentation, we will talk about suspensions, and when I finish that, then later in another video presentation, we'll talk about the emulsions. Okay, what you are supposed to know or to answer after finishing this topic اللي هو suspensions. Again, we are talking about suspensions. You are supposed to be able to differentiate between a suspension and an emulsion. Suspension and emulsion. The emulsion, as I said, it will be in another video presentation. Also, you need to compare between different dispersed systems. يعني here this dispersed system, we said suspension, emulsion are among dispersed systems, but there are other preparations that are classified under dispersed systems, so we need to know about them. Okay, you need also to compare the different emulsification theories, and this is in emulsion, of course. What causes the emulsion to be prepared? Because as you know, emulsion consists of oil and water, and they don't mix with each other. So in order to keep them in each other, we need to do emulsification. Now there are theories for emulsification, so you need to compare between these different theories. Okay, also you're supposed to evaluate and select proper preparation, proper dispersed system to deliver a drug to a given patient or a patient population. Okay, يعني you need to consider the patient. Am I, for example, dealing with neonates, newborns? Am I dealing with children, with adults? Can I use alcohol or not, for example? Okay, so these are the objectives of the dispersed system topics, which includes, as I said, suspensions and emulsions. Now, let's talk about suspensions. In suspensions, we have, okay, a vehicle, okay, that has particles suspended in it in somewhat uniform. The suspension is somewhat uniform. Now, these particles that you see are referred to as the dispersed phase. And these particles here, these are referred to as dispersed phase. And the vehicle in which these particles are dispersed, this vehicle is referred to as dispersing phase or dispersion medium. The vehicle is referred to as dispersing phase, okay, or dispersion medium. Now the whole thing اللي هو dispersed phase مع dispersing phase, both together they form what we call a dispersed system. Dispersed systems. طيب, here it says differentiate or contrast or compare between different dispersed systems. Now in pharmacy, we like to classify the dispersed systems to three categories depending on the size of the dispersed phase. Okay, depending on the size of the dispersed phase. We can classify them as molecular, and in molecular dispersion or dispersed system, The dispersed phase is very small. That's why they call it molecular, because the size is molecular size. And this, of course, applies to true solutions or solutions. The solutions that we studied about before is considered as molecular dispersed system. Okay. طيب, when we have the colloidal system or preparation, colloidal preparation is between 1 nanometer to 500 nanometer or zero point 0.5 micrometer. Isn't, if it is less than 1 nanometer, we call it molecular. If it is 1 nanometer to zero point 0.5 micrometer, it's colloidal. Now, there are some molecular dispersion that are considered as colloidal. That is in the case when the size is 1 nanometer or above. And this happens when you are dealing with polymers. As you know, polymers are very large molecules and they can form colloidal dispersion, and sometimes they consider them as solution and at the same time as colloidal preparation. So there is some kind of intersection or in overlapping between the molecular and colloidal dispersed system. Okay, but you will see that the particle size is the one that divides these preparations. Now the other preparations, when it's more than zero point 0.5 micrometer or more than 500 nanometer, and we refer to them as ish coarse dispersion. Coarse dispersion. Now, example of coarse dispersion is or are اللي هو emulsions and suspensions. يعني what we are going to study in this topic and next topic هو example من coarse dispersions اللي in which the dispersed phase has a size over 0.5 micrometer. Here, heterogeneous or coarse dispersion. Okay, طبعا give an example like the blood that has the cells. Okay, colloidal dispersions زي plasma that contains proteins, large molecules, and the true solutions that are less than 1 nanometer. So let's now focus on suspension. Suspension, how do we define it? طبعا it's a liquid preparation even though we are not mentioning it here. Okay, so it's like solutions. We are talking about liquid preparations containing finely divided drug particles. Okay, what do we call them? اللي هو dispersed phase. Now I'm talking about dispersed phase. في الsuspension we call it the suspensoid. Okay, distributed somewhat uniformly. طبعا why we somewhat uniformly? Because it's random distribution. If you shake it, it will be uniform but randomly according to how the particles randomly get distributed. So somewhat uniformly distributed throughout a vehicle اللي هو dispersing phase. Okay, throughout a vehicle in which the drug exhibits a minimum degree of solubility. That's why يعني opposite to solution, in solution we are trying to find a vehicle in which the drug will dissolve very well. In suspension it is the opposite, so the drug does not dissolve in this vehicle. طيب, what are the types of suspensions? We can classify them to two types. One is ready to use form, يعني meaning that the suspension is in a liquid form and ready to be administered. And there is suspension that is provided in the form of dry powders. As in the solutions, if you remember, in solutions we also had dry powders for solution. In suspension, we also have the same. We might have dry powders, and USP, United States Pharmacopoeia, requests that in the label of such dry powders that are intended to be suspended in a vehicle to be referred to as for oral suspension. يعني the name of the product or the drug for oral suspension, indicating that it's a dry powders. Okay, and indicating that after adding the suitable vehicle and shaking that, you will get a suspension. Here you see an example of a suspension, caraphate suspension, and there is the concentration. If you remember, we talked about concentration before. This is one way of giving the concentration, 1 gram per 10 ml. Now, this caraphate contains sucralfate, and it's used in the intestinal ulcers, يعني to provide a coating over ulcer area in the intestine in order to protect it and heal it. Here طبعا this is ready to use, it's already يعني ready made, ready to use suspension. Now for oral suspension, let's look at the other example. Here you will see amoxicillin for oral suspension. انتبهوا for oral suspension. Okay, so what happens? You need to add the or enough volume of purified water in order to have the suspension ready. طبعا of course you have to add the purified water and do the agitation or shaking. You need to do the shaking. Okay. طيب, one will ask, why suspension? Why not a tablet? Why not a solution? Let's see the differences. Okay, reasons. First, if the solution is chemically unstable, okay, because you know sometimes if you dissolve something in water, for example, this will cause the reaction, any degradation to be fast. Okay, when it's in dry form, it's better. When it's in liquid form, then the reaction can happen. You know this. Okay, for any reaction to happen, it has to be in a liquid. So for solution, this might be a problem because when the drug is dissolved, reaction can start and degradation can start, like oxidation, etc. Okay. طيب, what about suspension? It's already liquid. Yes, you are right. But the difference here is that the solid particles, the suspended solid particles, are not in solution. Okay, so they are closer to being like a dry powder rather than a solution. Okay, so when you have a suspension, the solid particles are not dissolved, so reactions will be much slower. إذا compared to solution, it's more stable. Suspensions are more stable في degradation. Okay, in the طبعا I'm here talking about degradation. Otherwise, solution is better in terms of homogeneous distribution of drug and stability of drug. Okay, stability طبعا meaning not precipitating. طيب, another thing, and when I compare it to capsules and tablets, طبعا suspension, because it is a liquid form, it's easier to swallow. Another thing which is also related to liquid dosage forms, that you have the flexibility, okay, in administering the dose you require. You can administer 5 ml, 7 ml, 10 ml, 15 ml, 20 ml, 30 ml. إذن الدose is flexible, unlike a tablet where maybe you'll be able to cut it into 2 pieces, but that's all. Okay, and the doses are fixed usually. طيب, also compared to solution, when the drug dissolves in the vehicle, when it's dissolved in the vehicle, and becomes a solution. The drug taste, the drug taste will be felt in the tongue. يعني if you drink a solution, you can feel the taste of the drug even though you are trying to add flavoring agent and sweetening agent, still you will feel the taste of the drug. But if it is in the form of suspension, okay, when it's a suspension and the particles are not dissolved, okay, you will not feel the taste of the drug. Okay, the taste of the drug will be faint because it's not dissolved. Okay. طيب, what are the features that are desired في suspension? Like if you want to prepare a suspension, then what is required? Okay, the first thing what you require طبعا, in addition you want it to be effective therapeutically and chemically stable. In addition to that, you don't want the particles to settle easily, so the particles should settle slowly. That's what you like, because if they settle, يعني I'll show you how. If you have the particles in the vehicle, okay, and these particles settle quickly, okay, so you have this now, let's say this is the bottle, okay, if they settle quickly, what is going to happen? You will have this sediment and the vehicle here, and it doesn't look nice. Okay, so what you like to see is particles settling slowly but being easily redispersed upon gentle shaking. Yani you want it to go down slowly because eventually, you know, these are unstable preparation. When I say unstable, in terms of sedimentation, unlike solution. Okay, so once they sediment, you want to easily, with little of agitation, you want to be able to redisperse it. Okay, redisperse the particles. Also, these particles, you don't want to see them growing on size. Yani suddenly they are coming to each other and growing in size. Okay, you want them to stay constant السايز تاعهم. Also, when you shake them and you redistribute the particles, you want to be able to pour the required volume from the bottle easily or readily. Okay, you don't want it to be very viscous مثلا, like you know the honey is viscous, okay, and it will be difficult to pour it. You don't want that to happen. Okay, now it's very important, since we are talking about the sedimentation, is to recall, if you remember in pharmaceutics 1, اللي هو Stokes law. Stokes law talks about the sedimentation of spherical particles from a suspension. Okay, remember we took Stokes law, we took it when we were discussing methods of particle size analysis. طيب, according to Stokes law, the speed of sedimentation, يعني how fast these particles will sediment, okay, the speed or the rate of sedimentation, and they call it also the terminal velocity and velocity of sedimentation. The terminal velocity is equal to the square of the diameter, يعني diameter to the power of 2, multiplied into the difference في density rho, okay, difference بالdensity between the particle, solid particles, and the medium, يعني suspensoid with dispersing medium. Okay, difference in density multiplied by gravity constant, and then divided by 18 into viscosity بالبواز eta. This is eta. Okay, طيب, this is the equation used to measure how fast these particles will sediment. طبعا هناك في some assumption, like the concentration of the suspended particles are not high, the particles are spherical, the particles have uniform size, etc. There are some assumptions here, but you should be able to solve the example in the approved textbook that you have under physical pharmacy capsule 14.2. يعني Ansell's dosage forms and drug delivery system. Go to that, go to chapter 14, and you will find an example. This example is giving you or showing you how to do the calculation of velocity, how fast these particles will sediment. And the good thing, it will tell you about the effect of changing the diameter, what will happen to the velocity, and the effect of changing the viscosity, what will happen to the sedimentation rate. This is why I want you to go to the textbook and find out and exercise. Okay? Now, of course, if you look here, you will know that the diameter effect is very powerful, right? Because it's to the power of 2. So any small changes في diameter, okay, if you reduce the particle size, you will have a slower sedimentation rate. If you increase the particle size, you will have faster sedimentation rate. Okay, and the viscosity. طبعا the higher the viscosity, okay, the slower the sedimentation rate. كل ما كان ال preparation viscous, the particles will have difficulty to sediment. But of course, as you know, you cannot make it very viscous like the honey. Otherwise, you will not be able to pour the preparations. Okay. طيب, that's why we usually try to affect or to control mainly diameter or to play with the suspensoid. Okay, this one will give us a better effect, so we can, for example, try to manipulate or try to alter the particle size, uniformity of particle size, and how particles are separated from each other. See here, there is distance between the particles, so every particle can sediment freely. But what happens if they get together and aggregate? It is very possible they will sediment then very quickly. طيب, now what about the dispersed phase, the one that we said we can control better in terms of size, especially the size? You need to know that for good pharmaceutical suspensions, the size will be from 1 to 50 micrometer. معناته this is classified as coarse dispersion or coarse system, as we said before. Now, how can we prepare such particles? We can prepare them using micropulverizers. Micropulverizers, okay? And the process is referred to as micropulverization. And this process will give you a size from 10 to 50 micrometer. Okay, here we are talking about the suspensoid. If you want something even smaller in size, if you like something smaller in size, for example under 10 micrometer, then you can use the fluid energy grinding. We also refer to it as jet milling or micronization. Okay, so we use this one if we want even smaller particle size. Okay, this is the figure that shows you an air jet mill. Just in summary, a compressed air is fed along with the particle that you want to reduce the size. Okay, and you have the compressed air, and this will cause the particles to collide with each other and to friction with each other. Okay, and this will reduce the size. طيب, you will get less than 10 micrometer. If you like even smaller, because maybe you want the sedimentation to be so slow, then in this case you can go for a process called spray drying. Spray drying, and you will get a size of less than 5 micrometer. This figure here shows you a spray dryer. طبعا the solution is sprayed and it is heated. The drops or the vehicle or the solvent fill drops gets evaporated, leaving the small particles which are collected, and then you can use them in suspension. But do we really need to go for small, very fine particles? If we look at this equation, yes, the smaller the particles, the slower the sedimentation. But you know what is the problem? The problem is the smaller the particles, you have other problems coming in, including that when they sediment eventually, they will form a hard cake. They will stick to each other very strongly, and it will be difficult to redistribute. See, we need to redisperse. It will be difficult to redistribute the particles, so we will not be able to have uniform dose. Okay, so we will have compact cake upon settling, and it will be hard to redisperse it. Also, the shape is important. They found that when you have the particles as needle shaped, okay, uh, the sediment will be hard, will be tenacious, and it will be difficult to redisperse it. Compare, for example, if you have the particles in the shape of barrels, okay, cylinders, يعني like cylinders, barrels, okay, they will be dispersed better. فإذا size is important, shape is important, okay. Okay, طيب, what, so if shape is important, fine. Now what else we can do with the suspensoid? What else we can do? Okay, we can reduce the size to a certain extent. Okay, we can control the shape. Yes, we can do that. But what else we can do to prevent the particles from getting very close to each other and forming a rigid cake? What can we do? We can influence the suspension to be what we call flocculated suspension. Okay, to become flocculated suspension is one way of preventing the formation of hard cake. I'm talking about to prevent the formation of what? Of hard cake. Why I want to prevent it? So that if the particles settle down, I can redisperse it easily. So what is the answer? Is to form flocculated suspension or flux. يكون في عندنا flux in the suspension. So what is this? What I'm talking about? طيب, in order to explain this, in flocculated suspension, we are intentionally, like, okay, we have this, this is a container and we have the particles here. We are intentionally allowing the particles to come close to each other, okay. So we are telling them, okay, come to each other, I don't want you to be separated. طب هاي problem, because that means that these flocks will settle down very quickly because now the size is becoming bigger. Okay, wait a minute, let's think about the type of attractions and interactions that can happen between the particles. Okay, between the particles. I'm not talking about between the molecules, between the particles. Well, it's given by this one here. Where this is a distance, the distance between the particles. There is a particle here and particle here. See, the particle can come to this area, this is below the line. Below the line means there is attraction, but then there is repulsion, and then there is very strong attraction. Okay, I want you to understand this graph. Okay, you have a particle here, and with a distance, certain distance, you have a particle here. You want to create attraction here in this area, so the particle can come to this area. See, without having to come very close to the other particle. There will be an attraction, but with certain distance. That's why we call it floccule or flock. Flock means loose attraction. It's loose attraction. There is a kind of attraction, but it is loose. طيب, the particles are not coming closer because there is repulsion here. This above the line, repulsion. Okay? So what we want to do, we want to have this attraction but far away from the particles so that they can come closer to each other but not very close. Okay? In non-flocculated or deflocculated suspension, you know what you are having? You don't have this one. This one is not there. So what you have is attraction and repulsion. So the particles, they don't come closer to each other. They stay here. Okay, they don't come closer. And they settle down. They go down freely because they are not attracted to each other. There is no attraction area in a distance. طيب, when they go down and you have the particles coming down, and then the next particle is coming down, because of the heaviness of the particles that are coming down later, because of their heaviness and their weight, they will be able to overcome what? The repulsion here. They will overcome the repulsion, and then they will stuck and get to this area very close to the other particles. إذن بالdeflocculated, yes, the particles will settle slowly. Yes, they are separated when they are suspended, but once they settle down, the heaviness of these particles will start pressing on each other, and they will overcome repulsion اللي هون, and they will get very close to each other, and this will cause the hard cake to happen. So what is the solution? شو السوليوشن? The solution, let me just clear all these things. The solution is, for a distance, some distance, we want to have a little attraction. Okay? We call it secondary minimum weak flocculation. Okay? شوفوا هون, they will be separated. The particles have some distance. Here we don't have distance. They are compressed with each other. Here we have distance. So the solution is to have this one. Now, how can we have it? We will talk about this later. طيب, if we have this one, we said that settling will be very fast. Yes, it's gonna be very fast. You will have settling. But the good thing is that the settled particles, floccules, will not be condensed. They will not be hard. Okay? بينما if it is deflocculated, then the settled particles will be very hard, and it will be difficult to redisperse them. Here you can redisperse them easily because it's a flocculated suspension, and I will tell you later how we can create a flocculated suspension. Okay? طيب, now let's see the difference between both. شوفوا هون, period of standing, يعني I have here deflocculated, يعني each particle settle by itself, and here I have flocculated. Okay? See what is going to happen with time. For the flocculated, see, there is quick separation. صح? Yes. Okay? Here you will see that the separation or the precipitation is slower. See here, again, separation continues, But look here, you will start seeing ايش a hard sediment. Eventually, after a long period of time, you will see very hard sediment here, cake, we call it cake, that is difficult to redistribute, while here we have ايش loose sediment that is easily redistributed. Okay, طيب, since you know that, eventually the particles will settle down eventually, okay? And since you know that, and you have to tell the patients that if they take suspension, they have to shake it well before use. Which one you will prefer, flocculated suspension or deflocculated? The answer is I prefer the deflocculated. Why? Because it will be easily redistributed. The particles will easily redistribute. Okay? بينما deflocculated, even though it takes longer time for the particles to settle down, but the problem is once it settles, it will be difficult to redistribute the particles, which may result in non-uniform dosing. طيب, how can I prepare flocculated suspension? One of the ways is to add the bentonite magma. These are like clay, okay? It's made of aluminium phyllosilicate. The other way is to adjust the pH. They found that, especially with parenterals, because I cannot add bentonite magma in parenterals, I cannot do that. So in this case, I will alter the pH, and I will make the pH where the drug has the minimum solubility. You know that pH can affect solubility. So you'll put the pH where the drug has minimum solubility. Another way is to add or use some electrolytes. Why? Because you know the particles, they don't get to each other. See here, they don't get because of some kind of repulsion, had a repulsion force, and repulsion force can happen because of charges, okay? And the electrolytes, adding electrolytes, يعني adding many ions of both types will reduce this, and it will cause attraction in this side, okay? So adding electrolytes. The other, or the fourth way, is to add a certain concentration of ionic and non-ionic surfactants, whether ionic or non-ionic, okay? يعني controlling or adjusting the concentration of surfactants. Actually, they found that with little or with small concentration of surfactants, you will get deflocculated suspension, and if you increase the concentration a little bit more, you will end up with flocculated suspension. So these are the four ways by which you can get flocculated suspension. Remember what we were talking about the dispersed phase or the suspensoid. Now with the dispersion medium, what can you do? Remember I told you we can control the viscosity. Yes, we can do that by adding materials that will increase the viscosity, such as CMC اللي هو carboxy methyl cellulose, methyl cellulose, microcrystalline cellulose, PVP or povidone or polyvinyl pyrrolidone. I can add xanthan gum, bentonite. Bentonite itself that does the flocculation, also it can increase the viscosity. Increasing the viscosity will reduce sedimentation rate. But the problem is, and we have to pay attention to, you know, these agents can affect bioavailability. You know that when the vehicle is viscous, the bioavailability will be less, okay? Also, the drug might be absorbed to these materials, and these materials might interact with the drug in a way to make bioavailability less. طيب, إذن yes, we need to increase viscosity, but that's we have to be careful regarding bioavailability. The other thing is we cannot make it too viscous like honey, because it means we will not be able to pour it freely into a measuring device. Okay, that's why we were focusing on suspensoid. طيب, now it's important the flow, or let's say how the suspension, when we shake the suspension, this will cause the redistribution of the particles, and the way the suspension flow when you shake it or when you pour it is very important, and that is studied under the term rheology. شو هو rheology? Rheology is the study of flow characteristics. إذن if someone asks you what is rheology, you will say rheology is the study of flow characteristics. Usually this term is associated with the study of liquids and semi-solids. Usually it's associated with that. Okay. طيب, في rheology, or the science of flow, or the study of the flow, we use, for suspension, we use what we call viscometer. Viscometer is, maybe you have taken this, but it's a device, okay, that will allow to measure the stress, like if you have a solution, okay, or a suspension or an ointment or a cream, okay, you will have a spindle, and this device measures, it applies stress, it causes this to rotate inside the preparation, and it measures how fast this preparation responds to the rotation. يعني does it rotate easily, is it difficult. إذا في عنا stress وفي عنا shear is the rotation. Like, what is the response of the material I'm trying to rotate? I will apply force and I will see the response of this material. We can do that by the use of viscometer. Now, most, or let's say all flocculated suspensions are having what we call plastic flow. How I will know? By viscometer. Viscometer will tell me what type of flow is there. Usually for Newtonian, we call it for Newtonian type of liquids, the higher the shear, whether the shear can be here or this side, here is stress, okay, we'll call it stress, and here we have shear. The stress, again, the force applied, and the shear is ايش? The response. Or sometimes they put it, you have the stress here, stress يعني الفورس you apply in the suspension, and here you have the shear rate, or what we call the response from the stress. Okay, for Newtonian liquid, of course, the more stress, the more rotation, or the faster the liquid will move with you. Okay, that's for Newtonian system. But when we talk about suspension, it doesn't follow the Newtonian system like this. It follows another way. Okay, let's see this another way, which is referred to as plastic flow. Okay, شوفوا, here we have the stress, and here we have the shear, or rate of shear, or shearing rate. You will see that when you first apply very little stress, what happens? Do the suspension respond to you? The answer is no. But why it's not responding to you? The reason is because of floccules. Because of floccules, they are like attached to each other in some kind of force that is resisting the flow. مش حكينا في هناك small attraction? Yeah, this will resist the flow. That's why if you see here in the graph, first you will see that it's not responding to you even though you are stirring or you are moving, but the suspension is not moving with you. But then you will start getting this normal movement like Newtonian liquids. Now the point here is called yield value, and it represents what? It represents the strength of attraction here. How much strong is this flocule? كل ما كان الاتراكشن more, the more the attraction, the larger is the yield value. Okay, which is, it's defined as the stress at which you can break the flocules and the shearing will start. Okay, because before that shearing is zero. طيب, another thing which is associated with suspension اللي هي pseudoplastic flow. Pseudoplastic flow, and it's also referred to as shear thinning systems. Here we are talking about the vehicle. Okay, I'm talking about the vehicle, not the suspension. Now it's desirable that the vehicle, okay, which usually of course maybe water or another vehicle containing usually polymer like tragacanth, methyl cellulose, carboxymethyl cellulose, the same that we studied here. If you remember, we studied them here, and I told you that these will increase the viscosity. Okay, طيب, what's good about them? Should nice about them? They are or the vehicle will follow pseudoplastic flow, and they are referred to as shear thinning systems. Okay, طيب, so what? طيب, these are the shear thinning system. You increase the stress, see what happens to shear rate. First, you have like a response. Yes, this response is weak. Okay, يعني you are applying stress but the response is weak. But suddenly you will start to have a response easily, quickly. Okay, with little increase in force you will start to have good shear. طيب, what is the good thing about that, about this pseudoplastic flow? Okay, the good thing is when your container or when your bottle that has suspension is on the shelf, you don't want, or what you need is your vehicle to be viscous. Okay, why you want your vehicle to be viscous when it's not moving, when you are not shaking or doing something like that? Because you don't want the particles to settle down quickly. Okay, because you don't want the particles to settle down quickly, this is good. At stationary or when it's not moving, the viscosity of the vehicle should be little high so that the particles do not settle quickly down. Okay, طيب, once you want to shake it before administration, now you want to shake so that you get a uniform dosing, and then you want to pour. What do you want to see? You want to see with increasing stress it's becoming less viscous. طبعا this increases like a lot. It's like telling you now I am less viscous. Okay, because with little stress it's moving easily now. شوف, with little stress it's moving easily. Okay, the shear rate is going up quickly, so it's moving easily, it's responding easily, so I can now redistribute the particles easily. Okay, you got it? إذن pseudoplastic vehicles are important, and they are helping us so that when the suspension is stationary or on the shelf, the viscosity is high and settling of particles is slow. When you apply shear, okay, suddenly you will start to see that the viscosity is becoming less and less. Okay, يعني not constant. شوف الفيسكوسيتي في النيوتونيان system, okay, when it's straight line, that is constant. Okay, but here the viscosity is decreasing, and that's why they call it shear thinning systems. thinning يعني بصير خفيف يعني viscosity less. Okay, with shear it will start to be ايش to have low viscosity. طبعا why this is happening, the reason for this is that in the beginning when you are applying shearing stress, in the beginning the molecules of tragacanth, methyl cellulose, or sodium carboxymethyl cellulose, these molecules are randomly oriented in solution. So if you have, let's say, a solution, some of them are like that. Some, I'm talking about the molecules, not about the suspension. The molecules, some of them is like this, etc. So you will have random. When you want to do shear, you want to stir, you are having more resistance in the beginning. But after sometimes all of them will be aligned with your movement. All of them will be aligned with your movement and it will be easier to move. When we say thixotropic, which is applying to the same thing we talked about, اللي هو shear thinning systems, اللي هو pseudoplastic, the nice thing about that is that after you apply the stress, okay, and you have this nice alignment of molecules in the direction of the stress, after that when you stop the stress or when you stop applying the rotation or the force, what happens to these molecules? They do not come back to the previous configuration where they are randomly oriented quickly. They will be randomly oriented, but it takes some time. Okay, so it will be aligned for some time and slowly it will return back to its random orientation. And when it's in random orientation, you have high viscosity. What it means after applying the stress, the preparation for some time, it will be like ish, like a solution. It's going to be like a solution. This is called thixotropic flow, which is a breakdown in structure that does not reform. هذا الstructure randomness. I'm breaking it by aligning the molecules to be in the direction of the force I'm applying, and it does not reform immediately when I remove the stress. So when I stop, these molecules will continue aligned with the previous direction and slowly they will start coming back to their random position and high viscosity. This is the reversible gel to sol. يعني gel يعني gel the viscosity is high, sol يعني solution the viscosity is low. As I said, this is applied to shear thinning systems. Okay, now for some, and you need to pay attention, for some preparations, like for example this one, this is a suspension, okay, and you have a dropper here. This is for maybe a neonate or a child or a baby, and they can take from this container, they can take some of the preparation and then drop it in the mouth of the baby. Okay, such preparation sometimes they refer to them as syrups, even though in reality they are suspension. Okay, that's why they will tell you, or sometimes you might read or you might see on the package, this is syrup even though it's suspension. And you remember how we defined syrups. We said syrups ish. Syrups are aqueous preparations, they are solutions. But how come we call suspension syrups? We call them when the taste or when the preparation of suspension is sweet, such as when we have products for babies and children. Okay, even though they are in reality suspensions, but we call them syrups because of what they contain, and they contain sugar in a good amount. Okay, طيب, how do we prepare suspensions? First of all, if the powder is not easily wetted, okay, which means if you add this powder to the vehicle where you want to make the suspension, if they don't get wetted easily, then what they're gonna happen, they will float, okay, and they will come closer to each other. Yani let's say this is a vehicle and I'm adding particles here, then the particles will be on the surface. They are not easily wetted. So how do we wet the particles in order to allow it to be uniformly distributed in the vehicle? One way is to add materials such as alcohol, glycerine, propylene glycol, or other hygroscopic liquids. Okay, employ these as wetting agents. So how do we do it? In small scale, remember in pharmaceutics 1, levitation. Okay, you take the particles في mortar, okay, you add the levigating agent like for example glycerine and triturate. Now what do they do? In each particles في هناك there are crevices, there are maybe openings in the particles on the surface, and these crevices or places on the surface of the particles may be filled with air or oil كمان, and these are preventing it from getting wet. So by adding glycerine, for example, and using the mortar and pestle to triturate, you will be able to replace the air around the particles with glycerine, which is hygroscopic. So once you add water after that, the water will be able to wet the particles. Okay, this is how it's done. Is an one way in a small scale by levitation. In large scale, we will do the same thing, but we will use what we call colloidal mill. Okay, this is a colloidal mill that will help you prepare suspension in large scale. Usually, you have the drug particles that you are trying to levigate, and you have the vehicle that contains all other ingredients like coloring agent, flavoring agent, sweetening agent. You have that vehicle. So you have the drug particles, the solid particles that you are levigating, and then you have the vehicle. And then with the vehicle that has all the formula except the drug, you will start diluting suspension that you prepared في المورtar and pestle. Okay, you will start diluting it, keeping a volume left from the vehicle at the end in order to wash the mortar with it, so that you don't lose any of the drug in the equipment or in the apparatus you are using. Can it contain preservative? Yes, of course. You need to have preservative to prevent contamination. The formula, as I said, can have flavors, sweetening agent, coloring agent. You can put anything, but be careful when it comes to neonates. We will talk about this later. Okay, now suppose you are in a hospital and they ask you, okay, please prepare suspension for a neonate. Okay, so you have capsule, you have tablet or tablets, and from them you want to empty the capsules or crush the tablets to prepare a suspension. Can you also add flavors, alcohol, preservatives, etc.? The answer is no. Keep it as simple as possible. Alcohol is not good. Alcohol can cause gastric irritation to the neonate. It can also cause depression, okay, neural depression, because you know alcohol can cause depression and drowsiness. A preservative, especially benzyl alcohol, is associated with gasping syndrome that can lead even to death, because some neonates, they are not able to metabolize benzyl alcohol, This can cause a problem. Flavors also can cause problems في النيونيتس. Propylene glycol can cause problem. So you want to avoid anything except the drug and the vehicle as much as possible. Okay. Don't forget that you will need to put your if you are preparing extemporaneous suspension, keep it in airtight light resistant container, because you don't know what is the expiry date. This is extemporaneous. Okay, so you want to keep it in a refrigerator and in airtight and light resistant container. طيب, the problem, as I said, you don't know the expiry date, and you don't know if your drug is compatible, and you don't know many things. So how will you know if you are in a hospital and the physician is asking you, please, you are a pharmacist, you are better than me, the physician is telling you, you are better than me, prepare a suspension for this neonate or for this adult, whatever. So one thing you can do is contact the manufacturer or its representative in the country. Okay, for example, here in UAE, we have offices for almost all international manufacturers. So you can contact them and ask them, I want to take your medication and prepare suspension. Do you have any literature, any information on how to do it? What is the expiry date? Another thing is that you can go to certain journals, such as the International Journal of Pharmaceutical Compounding, and you will find some published literature about preparing such preparations, such suspensions. Also, you may go to the package insert of the drug, and they may tell you, or they may give information on how to prepare a different dosage form out of this dosage form. Okay, these are some of the solutions. How do you package the suspension? You should package it in wide mouth containers having adequate air space. طبعا why wide mouth? Wide mouth in order to be able to pour the suspension. Why should have adequate air space? يعني it should not be full completely. Okay, the reason is you must, or the patient must, shake well before use. In order to shake well, it should have adequate air space. Most suspension should be stored in tight containers protected from excessive temperatures, such as excessive heat, freezing, and also protected from light. Don't forget, as I said, that the suspensions should be shaken well before they are used. Here we have some examples. Okay, for example, we have Malox اللي هو has magnesium hydroxide and aluminium hydroxide. في عندنا Malox وفي عندنا Gaviscon, and we have antibacterial suspensions such as erythromycin and tetracycline derivatives. Okay, and we have dry powder for oral suspension. معناته this is available as dry powder, and then you have to suspend it, such as amoxicillin and cefaclor. Okay, طبعا you need to add water to the specified volume. There is also for oral suspension. There is also cholestyramine, and that is for the management of hyperlipidemia. We have also a radio-opaque agent, which is barium sulfate, and it's used to, after administering it to the patient, it's used to visualize the GIT tract because it's radio opaque. With that one, after the patient takes it, okay, you can see the lining or the wall of the intestine, and you can see if there is inflammation, if there is obstruction, anything. You can see that. And there is rectal suspension of barium sulfate, same thing, but rectal suspension. So it can be injected or administered into the rectum in order also to visualize the rectum, okay, or the colon area. Also, there is to treat inflammation or ulcer rectally. في عندنا الهيدروكورتيزون. Hydrocortisone can be also administered rectally and it's in the form of suspension. Okay, here you have some examples that it will be good for you to look at, especially if you are preparing the project, okay, according to what I requested you. Okay, you have some examples here. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. Thank you very much for listening and have a nice day. Bye bye.